joined again by Dr. Jason Maljaars, a neurologist at St. Francis. He's been with us for a while now, just talking about some general nutrition and diet information. We've been learning a lot, but maybe if this is our first time watching the segment, or just as a recap, can you give us a little summary of what we've talked about so far?
Sure. Yeah, we are talking about how we kind of got to the dietary guidelines and the diet that we consume on average today in America. And it all kind of came from this concern of why people were developing heart disease and dying from heart disease in the early and mid 1900s. And there was this theory kind of put forward and quite quickly held to as a foregone conclusion that it was the fat in our diet and the cholesterol in our diet that was depositing itself in the arteries of our heart, causing heart disease, and therefore we had to reduce that as much as possible. And then because of that, we had to increase the other components of our diet, which ended up being carbohydrates. We talked a little bit about like the mindset that went with that. Was kind of like, if we're dealing with kind of evolution and randomness, then we can improve on that, so we can make things in a factory that will be healthier than things that come from nature. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think we got it quite wrong, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah, we've been talking about that a lot recently.
Yeah, and honestly, I want to ask, so where are we today in terms of dietary recommendations? We are
still surprisingly quite similar to where we started out. So in 1980, we had the first dietary guidelines for Americans that was produced, by the federal government, and it was this food pyramid. If you've ever seen it, the bottom of the pyramid is carbs. Mm-hmm. It's 6 to 11 servings of carbs per day, mm-hmm. and then it's fruits and vegetables, and then it's meat, and then it's sugars. And we're not really far off from that. So every 5 years, those get reiterated. Okay. And we had in 2020, we had the most recent iteration, and it's still very high in its carbohydrate recommendation, depending on the age group, but it's around 5 to 10 cups of carbs per day, and we're still recommending lower protein intake and especially lower saturated fat. So we really haven't made a big difference, over those 50 years. And as we can all see, the degree of chronic diseases, obesity, diabetes, and all that kind of stuff has only gone up in that time period.
Yeah,
interesting.
It is, and I think it's really cool to see how much our diet can impact our health in that way, and that we should really pay attention to it.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
You were saying how kind of the food pyramid and things hasn't changed that much. Why is that? Why has it not changed very much?
I think there's some interesting reasons to that, and some might be more controversial than others. I think one of them is that when these were first iterated in 1980, it was already established as a foregone conclusion that dietary fat and cholesterol gives us high cholesterol, which gives us heart disease. And we know that it's not that straightforward, but that was considered like, it was kind of like people are dying, so don't ask questions, which we've heard in our own lifetimes. And so we sort of have established that as fact, although there isn't really like very strong, robust evidence for that. So that's one. I think there's a fair amount of industry sort of interest in the current dietary guidelines. So in 2020, the panel of there was an investigation, kind of a report done on the conflicts of interest of the people who developed the guidelines, and 95% of the panelists, the people that developed these guidelines in 2020, 95% of them had ties to the food industry. 95%. So and these are industries that, again, produce tons of corn, tons of soybean, and have plenty to gain from by dietary guidelines that are high in carbs, and have plenty to lose if we were to say something radical like, carbs are not nearly, we don't need to eat them at all, perhaps, mm-hmm. and maybe we can have some more beef. That would be a big upset. So yeah. I think that's part of the reason. There's a number of things you can imagine. There's plenty of, there's plenty of good intention, well-intentioned people, obviously, who are really believe that, if we could only adhere to these guidelines a little more closely, we would have, better health. But there's a lot of factors that have gone into why we're not really making radical changes.
Yeah. Right. And then we also want to know, so what does the most up-to-date science suggest is the healthiest way to eat? Because I feel like you said, a lot of people nowadays are focusing more on their diet.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is a really good thing. I think since 2020, people have really started to take a great interest in like, hey, is there something I can do and be active, rather than just sort of, sit back and wait for diseases to take me over and then take pills for them. So that's a very good shift in mindset I think we're having, and it's exciting to see what will come of that. Basically, we know a few things now and we've known a lot of these things for a long time, but we know that a high carb, low fat diet is not the best thing. And that's kind of been the theme of the recommendations throughout the years. It's been, you know, high carb and very low fat. And especially the low fat recommendation, there's never been strong evidence for that. So we know that that's not necessarily the best thing. We know that ultra processed food is a problem. So everybody agrees on that. So, you know, when you have your packaged cookie is a perfect example. You got to process the flour, you got to process the soybeans into oil, you got to process the sugar and all that kind of stuff, and you put it all together into something that represents food. And we know that's bad for us. And we also know that saturated fat, which is the form of fat that we find in animal protein and the fat, the animal product fat. So tallow from beef, lard from pigs, butter from dairy, etc. We know that that's nowhere near as bad as we kind of have always made it out to be. We know it's not as simple as if you eat that, you know, bacon and eggs, that's a heart attack, you know, on a plate. We know that's not the case anymore. So those are some things we know. And then we know that, let me say what I advise to my patients when they ask me, you know, what should I eat and stuff. And I don't necessarily advocate for one single particular diet. I say kind of two things. You've got to eat food that occurs in nature, for starters, and secondly, that food should be produced in the way that nature intended. So it does make a difference if your egg is coming from a free-range chicken that lives outside and eats grass and bugs and, you know, has sunlight on it versus one that lives in a barn with a million other chickens and is breathing, you know, all kinds of, you know, bad air and has got hormones and antibiotics and stuff like that, right? The same thing applies with your beef. So food from nature, produced in the way that nature intended, is a good start. It's a complicated thing. There's way more details, but that's kind of the rules of thumb that I give to my patients. So.
Yeah, I like that. It can be really hard, I feel like, change a mindset, especially on diet, especially when it's been around for years and years and years. But I think it's really cool, like you were saying, lots of people are way more interested in eating better and healthier.
Yes.
And like, there's a lot that goes into that, but I like that you gave us two simple things to remember. Food from nature, yeah, I like that. So hopefully you guys can apply that. I know he always gets me with the processed food. I'm working on it.
Oh, I felt it too.
Yeah, I'm working on it, doing my best, but trying to remember these things. So thank you for continuing to come on and give us so many great tips and facts to know also. Thank you for that.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. All right, guys, stick around. We'll be right back after the break.